Hi, this is Tom Metzger, your host for Race and Reason again, that longest-running show of its type on cable access TV. Seen around the country on many local cable access systems, and those cable access systems serve many times 3, 4, sometimes 5 towns and cities. And we're dedicated, of course, to freedom of speech, true freedom of speech, which upsets some of our opposition. We feel we're an island of free speech in a sea of controlled and managed news, and if you don't think news and so forth is controlled, only 26 corporations control all the media in the United States. So today we have a very interesting guest who's been on the show before. His name is Nicholas Schreck, and he has a musical group and organization called Radio Werewolf that he terms a musical terrorist organization, and he's also a revisionist writer who has written a book called The Study of Charles Manson. Nice to have you here.
Always a pleasure
Nicholas.
to be here, Tom. How are you?
What's been happening to Nicholas Schreck since the last time we met?
Well, we're entering phase 2 of Radio Werewolf's operation for world dominion, and what we're waging is a cultural war right now on every front, in music, in literature, utilizing the media against itself.
Get into large circulation, established conservative media, reach, filthy rich movie makers, intellectuals, so-called academic circles, cynical, egocentric people who can look into your eyes with angelic expression and tell you a lie. These are the most recruitable people, people who lack moral principles, who are either too greedy or to suffer from self-importance. They feel that they matter a lot.
The Western people that is unique in the world, and it is a Gothic spirit, and I think that's the purest form of Western culture, and I think we keep that flame alive in Radio Werewolf.
I understand you're talking about the evolution of this, that your music is getting more into the political...
Well, our music... Well, I wouldn't say political, because we transcend politics. Politics is merely the puppet show of human beings, and we transcend that. But we are interested in the control of human beings for our own purposes. You
have a symbol on your left arm here. Could you sort of scoot over? What is this?
This is the 13th rune in the ancient runic alphabet of the Norse people, and it represents Yggdrasil, the tree of life. And this is the meeting point between life and death.
Is that the tree that Odin was supposed to have been crucified on?
Exactly, and it's the tree that symbolically supports the universe. And the wolf's angle symbol we use as the symbol for the Abraxas Foundation, which is sort of a Thule society for the 90s. In the words of my collaborator Boyd Rice, it's a fascist occult think tank. And what we're doing is coming up with new strategies and techniques to bring this cultural renaissance into the future, into the 90s.
I notice you have a wolf's ring on your finger there.
Well, as I've explained, the wolf has always been a particularly Western European image, and the wolf represents the beast in man. That's what we seek to unleash in humanity, because it's been repressed and tamed by Judeo-Christian values, and that, above all, is what we seek to eradicate.
We had our own... We had this sort of proto-alt-right little clique back in the early 90s. It was Adam Parfrey, who was Jewish, but he was a publisher of Feral House. And he wants to... I mean, Adam just died, and I don't want to get too into it, but I think he suffered brain degeneration from... he had this car accident in the 90s that put water on his brain. And Adam got it from the minute I met him. And he told me, he's like, well, I hang out with all these Nazis because my parents are Jewish. And I hear the way they talk about non-Jews. And then in public, they're talking about racism. They're full of shit. Toward the end of his life, Adam on Facebook was a Trump derangement guy, 100%. And some people I know kind of he died of like a brain hemorrhage or something, or a stroke. But the thing about him was, okay, you can change your politics, but he changed his whole personality. Adam had a great sense of humor and would understand the moral panic that we're in these days. But he became panicking about Trump. But he was the publisher of that circle. Boyd Rice, who used to be considered he was like a noise musician.
Oh, an amazing poet, and I mean, his
Smart
lyrics
guy.
are
Yeah.
sardonic, but then the music is also listenable.
I put on chats that it was unlistenable, but yeah, Disneyland can wait. Nick Bougas, that he was part of our circle. Are you familiar with that name? And
I'm not familiar with him.
God, this is a hard thing. Somebody in the chat can say who Nick Bougas is. I'm not allowed to say who it is. Joe Byrne. Yeah, Joe. I'll say Nick did cartoons for us. That's all I'll say, and that's a pretty heavy hint. Nick is, but he's never. I don't want to say anymore. Nick's a really good friend, but that Happy Merchant's sure a good cartoon. That's all I'll say. Okay, but yeah, and Nick was one of them. Sean Partridge. There were a couple of them. We were all Nazi woke or whatever. We all were opposing that stuff. We all kind of, went our separate ways. But
the wolf should be unleashed. We can hearken back to Norse mythology where Fenris, the ancient wolf god, was unleashed upon the world, and the Götterdämmerung occurred, the Ragnarok, the end of the world. And symbolically, that is what we are undergoing right now in history, an end of the old order, an end of the old world, and the beginning of a new order.
The end of the economic determinist idea and moving towards race and culture.
Of every idea, of every traditional idea of the past. In my opinion, we're living in a dead world. All the traditions of the past are decadent, dead, corrupt, and anyone who continues to cling to them are like maggots clinging to a corpse.
So the music today, you would see it as...
Music of today is absolute swill. It's designed to keep young people passive, restrained, and it's designed to tame them and keep them into sort of domestic sheep. I would separate young people today into two breeds. There's predators, which are the wolves, and there are the sheep, and that's most of them. And we appeal to an elite. We are, frankly, an elitist organization. We seek a few excellent people. We don't want a lot of dross. We don't want a lot of mediocre followers. What we want are people who are capable of action.
Do you see a lot of, do you see some elements of what you're talking about in other music that's...
I think the skinhead movement is a very positive step away from the decadence of the rock and drug culture that has dominated the youth so much. But as Adolf Hitler said, we seek to bring about a youth that has closed its heart to pity. All of the humanist values that Judeo-Christianity has encouraged, we want to wipe them out. It's led to democracy, social humanism, the idea of equality. All of this filth has to be wiped out if the human race is going to continue to take the next step in evolution.
What do you believe that would be like if you were in control as far as your attitudes towards your own people?
Well, we are in control because basically we are not a political organization, we are an occult organization.
Who are these people that I refer to as the dark occultists? You can call them a million different names, folks. Doesn't matter what you call them. You can call them sorcerers. You can call them dark Luciferians, those who have the light and use it for dark purposes. They are Satanists, okay? They are Setians. They are the Klipotic Kabbalists. Klipoth is the region below the tree of life that is the hell world in the Kabbalistic tradition, that is the inversion of all the true teachings of Kabbalah, of the true moral lessons of the true tradition, esoteric tradition of Kabbalah. If you descend into the Klipotic realms, it's the wastelands, the lands of the spent and corrupted souls that are simply husks, that used to be souls and spirits that are just like, withered out husks, the wastelands, in other words. That's Klipotic Kabbalah. They are the dark Masons of the world. They are the dark Atonists. Aton was a variation of the sun or the light in the ancient Cometian tradition. Ultimately, it's all one cult, folks. It's the cult of the black sun. You could call them by any name you want, but they are a dark solar cult. Okay? When I say the dark sun, why the black or the dark sun? The sun represents light. It represents knowledge. It represents empowerment. It represents life. The antithesis of that, the total polar inversion of that, is It's still a form of light, it's still the sun, but it has darkness within it. So it's knowledge being used for all the wrong reasons. Knowledge being used to control, not enlighten, not uplift. Knowledge being used to put people in a prison. Knowledge being used to being used as a power differential over people who are still in a level of ignorance. So you're blinding people with that light, and you're enslaving them with it, with that knowledge. That's what these people are. Okay? If you don't even want to look at it in esoteric terms, they're people with the knowledge of how the self works, meaning deep psychology, very ancient, deep knowledge of psychology, combined with people who know about how the laws of nature function, which is very deep, hidden science. That's it. There are the two sciences that are at work. The physical sciences combined with psychology. And then you put the understanding of how moral law functions into there, which they know as well, and rebel against because they want to be gods on earth and they want to conquer the natural law consequences or evade them to the longest amount of time that they possibly can. They're all the same cult. It doesn't make a difference who we're talking about here. You could be talking about Satanists, Setians, the worshippers of the great owl at Bohemian Grove, the Skull and Bones Order of Death, the cult of the Black Sun that came out of the Nazi and SS party of Germany. All right, in the modern day, they're top-level international bankers, top-level political figures, top-level financiers, high-level religionists, high-level members of royalty, so-called royal families, judiciary, military, high-level military, people involved at highest levels of media, highest levels of medicine, highest levels of education. Again, highest levels of all religious systems on the earth, and anybody's religion out there is not exempt from that. So-called cultural religions. Secret societies and fraternal orders, think tanks, intelligence agencies, you name it. This is where the highest concentration of dark occultists are at. This is who they are. This is how they operate in the world. These are the institutions who determine how people's lives will be run, because we let them. And at the top level of every one of these institutions, you're going to find the cult of the Black Sun operating.
As the tech revolution continues to destroy old media, the internet is fueling a new intellectual awakening.
Television made people look stupider than they were. It turns out that people are smarter with longer attention spans than we thought.
I'm a journalist and filmmaker. For many years I made documentaries for the likes of the BBC and Channel 4.
But I don't think the mainstream media can provide the level of analysis and insight we need for the extraordinary times we're going through, where the old structures that made sense of the world break down.
It's like we're just entering into the underworld, and it's a descent. We're feeling everything starting to shake, and the center cannot hold.
And when our ways of thinking break down, it's the rebels and the renegades who dare to think differently who are needed to reboot the system.
Right, so what's happening is that people are perceiving, because it's becoming increasingly obvious, that all of these artifacts of the way that we've gone about doing civilization are breaking down and failing in a way that is no longer easy to pretend isn't happening. And so as a consequence, this triggers a deep visceral sense. And that's a good thing, right? Because that deep visceral sense is the return to the liminal, the return to the mystery.
The shift that we are on the precipice of is not like the shift from the Dark Ages to the Enlightenment. It's more like a shift from single cell to multicellular life.
These are the people and ideas Rebel Wisdom is searching out to try to make sense of the growing chaos.
Evolution screwed up. It handed us the tools to recognize that we don't have to value the game that it is playing, and that we can now repurpose the hardware to something that's actually worthwhile.
That's what I actually have hope in, is that if enough people can come to that realization, then we wake up, and not in some bullshit evangelical megachurch kind of way of being born again, but in a truly initiatory way, being born again, of I know my purpose, I know my part, and I'm willing to practice resurrection. I'm willing to offer my life fully and freely, in love, in every moment, And then we're invincible. Like, then we can turn things on a dime.
It's also about trying to create a new form of conversation, one based on genuine dialogue, letting go of ideology and fixed ideas.
So we want to be a place that hosts this new form of conversation, both online and at our events. Check out our films, join the conversation, and to get early access to some great films and exclusive content, please consider supporting us on Patreon.
We're working behind the scenes to manipulate the way that people think. The war that we are waging is a guerrilla war on the human mind. And we use musical frequencies, the dominant frequency, which I've referred to before, and symbolism and imagery to awaken dormant aspects of the human mind.
Isn't it difficult to get club dates and things like that? Obviously, once...
Well, we no longer are working in the context of that whole sphere of activities. We are moving into a much more elitist direction. We're only seeking individuals who are competent and who are willing to take action. There's a lot of people who will be an audience or a spectator, but we want people who will act.
And so the Abraxas Foundation's been for some time? Or?
The Abraxas Foundation is an organization that Boyd Rice and myself founded, and it's dedicated to bringing about the values which we consider true and determined by the natural order. And in our opinion, humanity has moved away from nature, and race mixing, genetic suicide, the destruction of the gene pool, all of that is completely inimical to the natural order. We need to return to order.
Is this, could this parallel somewhat Nietzscheism and Nietzsche?
Well, Nietzsche was certainly a forerunner of our thinking because basically we're concerned with evolution, maintaining the very best of humanity and destroying weakness, destroying everything that Judeo-Christianity has succored and kept alive. We have no concern for the homeless, particularly. We don't have any concern in helping people. We're not seeking to convert people. As far as I'm concerned, in 1988, this is the cutting point. Either you're with us now or you never will be with us.
What do you think about writers like, say, Oswald Spengler, writing In Decline of the West, the cycles of civilization?
I very much believe we are now in a cycle of order. The 60s, 20 years ago, represented a cycle of decay, and since my message is directly intended for young people, I would say it's about time that young people move away from the corrupt values of the 60s, the drug culture, race mixing, equality. The whole chaos of that period is ending, and we're going to see a new social movement in the 90s that will make Nazism and fascism look like kindergarten.
How is this going to happen? How are they going to arrest this tremendous power of the economic elite? Or do you intend on converting some of the economic elite?
We are moving into the mainstream. There are already people in the economic elite who share our philosophy and our beliefs. And I believe that our enemies are really paper tigers, to borrow a page from the communist doctrine. I believe that our enemies are no threat to us anymore. They're dead. They're dead weight. All that's required is for vital youth to rise up and separate. I very much believe in separation. We need to step away from the entire rotting edifice of our culture.
Was that just ideologically or physically?
Ideologically, and we're moving into the point where it must be done physically. And the main problem is the population explosion. There are too many people in the world for there to be any kind of quality at all. It's all designed for the lowest common denominator.
Well, isn't there a problem, though, that since 1972, about 92% of the abortions have been white?
Well, of course, we are strictly concerned with the Western European tradition in every kind. We have no concern for any other. That's why we maintain a firm alternative to the African culture, the Asian culture that is dominating the Western world. Young people are caught up in a nightmare of racial confusion, and we seek to end that.
Do you think that this AIDS phenomenon...
I welcome the AIDS phenomenon.
I hear they're projecting 55 million people in the next 20 years dying throughout the world. The depopulation of Africa, could you foresee a recolonization of Africa after such an event, since it's primarily blacks?
Well, as Francis Parker Yockey stated, I believe the Western imperative is to seek an imperium. The Western man, the Faustian man, seeks to dominate the world. And we are losing right now. And people are waking up to that fact, that we can no longer let our culture and our entire history die out in the face of this dysgenic ocean of mud that has swept the world.
Don't you fear, in playing somewhat a little bit with the economic elite that may say they are converted, you getting a hold of
I don't like the word conversion. As I said, you're either with us or you're against us. We've drawn the lines. There's a battle raging right now. And it really doesn't matter whether the masses, that amorphous term, really understand what we're doing. We're moving ahead, and it really doesn't matter where they are.
Well, what I meant was where the elite economic would come in and try to manipulate you as a weapon for them.
Well, we're beyond that. That couldn't happen to us because we're not seeking any kind of... We're seeking a completely new world. We're removed completely from the traditions and cultural values of the old world. And we're moving into... We're creating the new man. It's an evolutionary movement.
The study of the wolf would show tremendous fierce independence and very loyal to his
These are
kind.
values, of course, that have been completely forgotten by the sheep mentality, the herd mentality of present-day mankind.
And the wolf was quite, in most, I believe, monogamous in most cases, isn't the wolf?
Well, yes, absolutely. The wolf represents a wildness and yet a nobility and an independence that humanity has lost today.
And a territorialist, definitely.
Absolutely. As I say, we return to the natural order. Nature is the only law that we follow.
Is that in other words, we have to sit down and, instead of looking at nature as being inferior, look at nature as being, in many cases, superior?
I consider human to be an ugly word. I think most of humanity is debased and deformed and evolutionary unfit to continue. And I think we need, I wouldn't use a Rousseau-like philosophy, we don't need to return to anything, but if a new creature, a new man is to be born out of the ashes of this old one, we need to return to nature.
It's interesting that some of this seems to have points in Robert Audrey's works on territorial imperative.
African Genesis, the territorial imperative.
And the evolution of social contract is quite interesting. And it's sort of amusing to some people, but the structure of the baboon society is a very interesting study, which a lot of people...
Well, I think we can look all around us in the decaying metropolises of America and see what baboon society is like every day.
Do you see the rise of these gangs, so-called gangs?
All these are...
They're territorialists, well, they're gradually going to be
Here's what's happening is, as blacks are returning to their tribal roots, basically these gangs are nothing more than a return to the primitive tribal behavior that was appropriate in their African homeland, because that's their cultural level, and they will never rise above it. And white people, young white people, are also returning to their cultural roots.
Slower. Much slowly.
What's going on is a civil war. It is a civil war. It hasn't been declared yet, but there's a stratification process going on throughout the entire world, and the lines of battle are becoming drawn very clearly.
And the centers of that battleground appear to be the urban centers around the world.
Because the urban centers, just as in ancient Rome, are the cesspools of cultural degeneration right now.
Now, you have been involved with the publication of this book,
right.
The Manson File. Now, that would really raise the hair on a lot of people. And
well, these so-called revolutionaries in the movement who are afraid of something like Charles Manson, or who are afraid to look at his philosophy, reveal really how bourgeois they really are. They don't want to change that much. They're not that radical.
Well, what is in here about...
Well, if we look, it's a revisionist study of what Charles Manson was really all about, not what the media has told you it's all about. And certainly people in the movement should know that the media is the great liar, that everything in the media is a distortion, and certainly the work you're doing is an attempt to bring some truth and balance into the enemy camp, into the media. The Charles Manson created by the news and popular accounts of what happened has been turned into a popular bogeyman But really, he was one of the few voices of reason in the 60s. What he tried to create was a white colony, a racial, ecological colony of people, which is very much akin to a national socialism.
Weren't they a lot into drugs and things like that, though?
Well, I think that was an unfortunate side effect of the social milieu which they were in, but I don't think it should be stressed or overemphasized. I think the most important thing about Manson and why he continues to be important, as I've said in my book, is that he's a sort of shaman or spiritual spokesman for the Western and white consciousness. In the same way that Adolf Hitler was in the 30s. I think Charles Manson fulfills that same role in our time.
Well, as Adolf Hitler evokes controversy over and over and over again to get into the Charles Manson situation, that is really controversy.
Well, as it says in my book, Charles Manson begins where George Lincoln Rockwell ends. His philosophy is a complete stepping away from the old ideas, and of course it frightens people, even in the so-called movement.
It's interesting that this book is not something you just find in a small bookstore someplace. It's on the big newsstand.
Well, as I say, we're moving into the mainstream. These ideas are too powerful to keep in any kind of underground context, and the truth will out. And it is coming out. It's about time. This cycle that we spoke of, this Spenglerian cycle, is revealing itself.
What do you is this like the Aquarian age, or what does that
Well,
mean?
I have no belief in astrology or anything like that, but it is a new age, as these idiots in the New Age call it, but it's not anything that they think. It's not a new age of crystals and herbal teas, but of blood and thunder. That's what we're going to see. It's a storm that's rising. And Charles Manson was simply a prophet of what's coming now. He sought to create a white and culturally sound value system in a period of chaos and disorder in the 60s, and that's what he should be remembered for.
Well, didn't he say something, though, about turning the blacks and the whites fighting each other? And then...
Well, that's the misconception that people like Vincent Bugliosi have fostered to try to make Manson seem like some kind of lunatic. But I think he's one of the most important radical philosophers of our time. People like James Mason of the Universal Order and Perry Wharton, who have been very much involved in the movement, have recognized Manson as a political thinker as well. And of course, people on the right and the left have seen that. If you want to talk about the third position, Charles Manson has always represented that.
This puts you out way on the edge, whether it's leading edge, side edge, or behind edge, or what. And you know as well as I
do. Well, we're a
that
vanguard.
you're not really, like you said, you're not out recruiting or like that. You have your own thing, and if people agree, they do it.
Mm-hmm.
But you know how hard it's going to be to so-called sell something like this.
Well,
of course, Nietzsche would have been the same way.
Exactly. Nietzsche was working 100 years ago in 1888. And we look at 1988 the same way that 1967 was called the Summer of Love. 1988 was the Summer of Hate. A lot of things were born this year that are going to dawn into the new phoenix of a new order. And Charles Manson, a new understanding of Charles Manson, is just the beginning of a massive revisionist project which we are undertaking.
Well, wasn't writers like Jack London similar to this?
Jack London very much stressed the wolf imagery and was a very lycanthropic person who respected nature and the brute force in man. His books like The Sea Wolf or Call of the Wild also conjured up the wolf, and he was very aware of Western European traditions. I would compare Jack London to Manson in a lot of ways. All of these people are working in the same spirit which we are working in.
We have today, our guest is Nicholas Schreck of Radio Werewolf, who has been with us before, and we're discussing the book, The Manson File, plus some new ideas coming forth from a significant group of people who are part of the movement, and we all have to get it together and talk it over. So what else is next?
Well, I think it's important that music be utilized as a tool for us, because that has been really the domain of the enemy for too long. It's been taken over completely by the absolute lunatic fringe of the left wing for years now. And if young people are only exposed to that kind of swill and degeneracy, then the next generation will also be a failure. We need to move them away from the drug culture, the just the entire disgusting mess that young people are in right now. And they are waking up and moving away. The skinhead movement is the beginning. It's not the end of what's happening.
How will you batter your way into producing records and things like that? When that whole industry is
we
pretty much Jewish.
We have no concern in dealing with that industry. What all of us have to do, working in every field, is create their own products. We have to have a completely independent republic. Everything must be done independently.
Like a nation within a nation?
Absolutely.
Sort of borrowing a little bit on the Jewish situation, how sort of a nation within a nation. Now, whites are beginning to realize that
well, we must maintain our own values. The industries of the world, whatever one you're talking about, from plumbing to music, we don't want anything to do with them. We've got to start our own empire. And to do that, we must stratify. We have to cut the ties completely with the old world.
Now, is this like tremendous amount of networking going on today?
Absolutely. There are people connected who, if people really were aware of the network that was going on, it would probably terrify them.
And the computers and all of the technology that's available.
Well, we're moving into 2000. We're moving into the future. And if we're going to claim the future and stamp our claws on the world to come, then we're going to have to utilize all of the technology at our disposal.
And so you will be moving into these...
the production of videos. Video Werewolf is one of the next projects which will be unleashed upon the world. And in every way, we've got to take over every field. We've got to return it to the natural order.
Doesn't it have to break down the national boundaries, too, to get...
There is no such thing as nations in the world
That's
anymore.
economics, right?
There are no nations left. I mean, that's a romantic and sentimental idea that died. Maybe it died in 1945. Maybe it died earlier than that. But we don't need nations anymore.
So...
what we're doing is calling forth for those who understand our message and who feel it in their blood to join us in our struggle. And we're not looking for followers. We're looking for leaders to unite together, leaders of every stripe and every kind in our movement.
Does this go behind and get back into the whites in Eastern Europe and so forth, too?
Of course. We have
Russia?
We have many contacts in Eastern Europe and throughout the world who understand that there are no nations anymore. The only nation that matters is the one that we are forming, the werewolf nation, the werewolf of the nation of youth that's unleashed its full fury.
Do you perceive a time when there may be even pirate radio werewolf radio stations?
Well, Radio Werewolf, of course, was a pirate radio station in Nazi Germany. It was the last transmitting station in the Third Reich. And in a sense, it's beginning where it ended.
I see that in Britain, there was a ship with a radio station out playing rock and roll that the U.S. Coast Guard now has boarded and smashed their equipment.
This sort of thing...
Are we going to be having wars out there beyond the 200-mile limit or whatever?
I would encourage that. What we need is terrorist activity, cultural terrorist activity on every front. We've got to put our message out completely undiluted and pure.
You're talking about counterterrorism almost.
Absolutely.
Because the terrorism's against us.
The terrorism that's the most dangerous is the terrorism that the average American faces when he turns on the television or listens to the radio and hears this ocean of lies and disinformation and distortions pour out at him every day. And the work that you're doing is akin to what we're doing because it's putting out the truth. It's taking forbidden information and placing it into the hands of those who can use it and know what to do with it.
The youth are the ones who naturally are more rebellious,
They haven't been raised with the traditions of the older generations. They can see the chaos and decay in the world, and they are willing to move into a new world.
Well, then, are we moving towards a more or less a Mad Max society of the movie?
In the sense that it's an apocalyptic society. The end of the world already happened, and we're living in a posthumous age. To seek to build something in the ruins out of using corpses and the refuse of a dead age is foolish. We need to build completely new structures. We need to return to a heroic and larger-than-life lifestyle. Heroism has been forgotten in our culture. Nobility has been forgotten. And what Radio Werewolf ultimately represents is a banding together of leaders, of knights, of a new black order.
So economic determinism has really shot its wad.
Absolutely. Capitalism and communism are equal failures. We move even beyond the third position, although we respect it, because we see a larger goal. We see a future that transcends anything that's even been conceived of before.
Well, it's good to have think tanks that are way out there on the edge, and no matter what anybody says about it. And in fact, those are the people, as far as I'm concerned, that should be protected the most. The most radical, the most way out there, because what if they'd have suppressed Nietzsche? People like,
well, I can,
they tried, I'm sure.
I can predict that what's considered way out or radical now will be the mainstream in the age to come.
Obviously, because we can look back 20 years, and if anybody told us things would be like they are today, no one would believe it.
And so we must be aware of these occult cycles, these hidden cycles that go on, and move with them.
Nicholas, it's been great having you back on the show. Radio Werewolf, the Abraxas Foundation. Been nice to see you again.
Always a pleasure.
Wish you good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you out there for watching Race and Reason and Free Speech.
Well, you spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets used the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the process which is legitimate, overt, and open. You can see it with your own eyes. All you have to do, all American mass media has to do, is to unplug their bananas from their ears, open up their eyes, and they can see it. There is no mystery. There is nothing to do with espionage. I know that espionage intelligence gathering looks more romantic. It sells more deodorants through the advertising, probably. That's why your Hollywood producers are so crazy about James Bond type of thrillers. But in reality, the main emphasis of the KGB is not in the area of intelligence at all. According to my opinion and opinion of many defectors of my caliber, only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The result you can see. Most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power in the government, civil service, business, mass media, educational system. You are stuck with them. You cannot get rid of them. They are contaminated. They are programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. You cannot change their mind, even if you expose them to authentic information, even if you prove that white is white and black is black. You still cannot change the basic perception and the logic of behavior. In other words, these people, the process of demoralization is complete and irreversible. To get rid society of these people, you need another 20 or 15 years to educate a new generation of patriotically minded and common sense people who would be acting in favor and in the interests of United States society.
And yet these people who've been programmed and, as you say, in place, and who are favorable to an opening with the Soviet concept, these are the very people who would be marked for extermination in this country?
Most of them, yes. Simply because the psychological shock when they will see in future what the beautiful society of equality and social justice means in practice, obviously they will revolt. They will be very unhappy, frustrated people. And the Marxist-Leninist regime does not tolerate these people. Obviously they will join the links of dissenters, dissidents. Unlike in present United States, there will be no place for dissent in future Marxist-Leninist America. Here you can get popular like Daniel Ellsberg and filthy rich like Jane Fonda for being dissident, for criticizing your Pentagon. In future, these people will be simply squashed like cockroaches. Nobody is going to pay them nothing for their beautiful, noble ideas of equality. This they don't understand, and it will be greatest shock for them, of course. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years. Actually, it's overfulfilled, because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes his, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. So basically America is stuck with demoralization, and unless, even if you start right now, here, this minute, you start educating new generation of Americans, it will still take you 15 to 20 years to turn the tide of ideological perception of reality back to normalcy and patriotism. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, it doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation, what matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized." This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C., with benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale, who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the promises are fulfillable or not. He will go to Moscow to kiss the bottoms of new generation of Soviet assassins. Never mind. He will create false illusions that the situation is under control. Situation is not under control. Situation is disgustingly out of control. Most of the American politicians, media, and educational system trains another generation of people who think they are living at a peacetime. False. The United States is in the state of war, undeclared total war against the basic principles and the foundations of this system. And the initiator of this war is not Comrade Andropov, of course. It's the system. However ridiculous it may sound, the world communist system, or the world communist conspiracy, whether I scare some people or not, I don't give a hoot. If you are not scared by now, nothing can scare you. But you don't have to be paranoid about it. What actually happens now, that unlike myself, you have literally several years to live on unless the United States wake up. The time bomb is ticking. With every second, the disaster is coming closer and closer. Unlike myself, you will have nowhere to defect to, unless you want to live in Antarctica with penguins. This is it. This is the last country of freedom and possibility.
Okay, so what do we do? What is your recommendation to the American people?
Well, the immediate thing that comes to my mind is, of course, there must be a very strong national effort to educate people in the spirit of real patriotism, number one. Number two, to explain them the real danger of socialist, communist, whatever, welfare state, big brother government. If people will fail to grasp the impending danger of that development, nothing ever can help United States. You may kiss goodbye to your freedom, including freedoms to homosexuals, to prison inmate. All this freedom will vanish, evaporate in 5 seconds, including your precious lives. The second thing, the moment at least part of the United States population is convinced that the danger is real, they have to force their government. And I'm not talking about sending letters, signing petitions, and all this beautiful, noble activity. I'm talking about forcing United States government to stop aiding communism. Because there is no other problem more burning and urgent than to stop the Soviet military-industrial complex from destroying whatever is left of the free world. And it is very easy to do. No credits, no technology, no money, no political or diplomatic recognition, and of course no such idiocy as grain deals to USSR. The Soviet people, 270 millions of Soviets, will be eternally thankful to you if you stop aiding a bunch of murderers who sit now in Kremlin and whom President Reagan respectfully calls government. They do not govern anything, least of all such complexity as the Soviet economy. So basic, two very simple, maybe too simplistic answers or solutions, but nevertheless they are the only solutions. Educate yourself, understand what's going on around you. You are not living at the time of peace. You are in a state of war, and you have precious little time to save yourself. You don't have much time, especially if you are talking about young generation. There's not much time left for convulsions to the beautiful disco music. Very soon it will go, just overnight. If we are talking about capitalists or wealthy businessmen, I think they are selling the rope on which they will hang very soon. If they don't stop, if they cannot curb their unsettled desire for profit, and if they keep on trading with the monster of the Soviet communism, they are going to hang very soon. And they will pray to be killed, but unfortunately they will be sent to Alaska probably to manage industry of slaves. It's simplistic. I know it sounds unpleasant. I know Americans don't like to listen to things which are unpleasant. But I have defected not to tell you the stories about such idiocy as microfilm, James Bond type espionage. This is garbage. You don't need any espionage anymore. I have come to talk about survival. It's a question of survival of this system. You may ask me, what is it in for me? Survival, obviously, because unlike, as I said, I am now in your boat. If we sing together, we'll sing beautifully together. There is no other place on this planet to defect to.